And thank you for joining us again at Square One Engineering's Lunch and Learn series. I'm your host, Trisha Ari, Senior Director of Operations here at Square One. Today, we have Trisha Krager. She has a dual role as a Director of Regulatory and Quality at Colteen and Global Regulatory Affairs Manager for Dent4U. She comes to us with over 25 years of experience in medical device development, manufacturing, regulatory, and quality. Her regulatory experience includes obtaining marketing authorizations in all major markets and regions throughout the world. Now, I'd like to turn over to Trisha. Take it away.
Thank you. Thank you for trading some of your time with me so that we can talk about two of my favorite subjects, artificial intelligence and then the world of regulatory submissions. I really don't have a background in artificial intelligence, but I'm really interested in how we can use artificial intelligence to work through our submissions and become more efficient at our jobs. So let's start with a number. The FDA has now authorized over 1,200 AI-enabled medical devices, over 1,200, and the growth curve looks like a hockey stick. Now, in 2015, keep in mind the agency had only cleared 6 AI-enabled devices, only 6. Now, today they're reviewing hundreds every year. But one of the more fascinating aspects of things, and where I think a lot of people are missing out, especially in the world of medical devices and medical device manufacturing, is looking at AI as the process, not AI as the product. You're always hearing people talk about AI in imaging, AI in diagnostics, but very few people are talking about AI in the process. These are the tools then that are going to help us build, compile, review, and submit these devices to the regulators. That's what we're going to talk about for the next 30 minutes or so. Not AI on the label of our products, but AI that's behind the curtain, that's enabling us to effectively get devices submitted and cleared and approved and authorized to market. Okay, so let's go through a brief history lesson. I'll try to keep this painless. But in the beginning of submissions, there was paper. Lots and lots of paper. If you are old enough to remember this, you're probably the one at the company telling stories. My team gets really irritated with my stories about papers and submission days. But if you've ever had to hand assemble one of these, you're experienced in a very specific form of suffering that'll bond a team together and you'll talk about for years. We've seen conference rooms that have been piled high with binders. You have to move submissions on a cart. And then you've got them color-coded and tabbed in a way that no one actually understands what's going on. And God forbid that that person goes on vacation. After this, then we finally moved into the world of electronic submissions. So we get the eSTAR template, for one, which the FDA finally made mandatory. It's progress, but again, let's be honest, we didn't eliminate any of the complexity that's involved in this. We still have the complexity, it's just we're not printing out papers. So instead of having binders that you could lose or drop on your feet, now you got to worry about somebody deleting your folder structure on the shared drive. And if you think about the scale of what we're talking about, so a typical PMA submission can run thousands of pages. A clinical evaluation report under the EU MDR can easily hit 300 pages with the dense cross-reference documentation that you have. And then if you multiply that across 40 plus regulatory frameworks that you may be working with your company, wow, now you've got a lot. And this is what makes regulatory affairs professionals, a very specific and special breed. The other thing, keep in mind too, that when you used to have to print all of these, you were basically, contributing to the destruction of the rainforest every time somebody found a typo or something was wrong. So that's where we're starting from. This enormous volume of paperwork, this enormous complexity. And typically the way companies dealt with this, and a lot of companies did this all the way up through, the EU MDR, you threw more people at it, you threw more hours at it. People needing coffee to stay awake. But now here we are in the age of AI, which is going to simplify things drastically. But before we go any further, I want to make sure we're all speaking the same language, because AI has now become one of those words like synergy or digital transformation that means both everything to everyone and nothing at all to anyone at the same time. So for the purposes of today, there are 4 flavors of AI that I think we need to keep in our mind. The first is generative AI. This is our normal ChatGPT, the Copilot, the large language models, the things that people typically use. They generate text, and they're disturbingly good at writing things that sound exceptionally authoritative, which we have to be careful with. The second aspect of AI I want us to look at here and think about is the machine learning. This is the pattern recognition at a scale. This is the predictive analysis, so that you can ask questions like, what is the FDA likely to ask based on 10 years of deficiency letters? So that's our machine learning. The third one is the natural language processing, or NLP. This is the ability of AI to read, to parse, to understand unstructured text. It's incredibly useful when you have a submission that's 400 and some pages, and you need to know if page 212 contradicts what you have on page 47. And the fourth is automation. This is the workhorse, the formatting, the cross-referencing, the version control, the template population. None of this work is glamorous, but this is a lot of places where we can get a lot of return on investment. Again, today we're going to talk about AI as a tool we use, not AI as the product we regulate. So I want us to use this submission lifecycle as our roadmap to go through. We've broken the submission process into 4 phases here. Preparation, assembly, or compiling the submission, your internal reviews, and then what happens after you send it in and you get your regulatory authority review. Okay, so preparation is where the strategy lives. This is where your regulatory intelligence gathering is going on, where you're doing your predicate searches, your literature reviews, drafting the foundational documents that you need. It's the thinking phase, and it's where most of the intellectual heavy lifting is going to happen. The next phase, the assembly of the documents, takes all those drafted documents, formats them appropriately, starts to cross-reference them, pulls them together into a structured submission. Okay, this is where people are making sure that every table matches every narrative, everything's in the right place. This is what happens when, you know, your weekends go to die. And you're stuck basically spending hours and hours and hours reviewing. The next phase is your internal review. We like to call that here our cross-functional chaos. It should be collaboration, but really it turns into a lot of chaos before we end up with a nice structured version. We have clinical people reviewing clinical sections, engineering people reviewing device descriptions, regulatory trying to pull it all together to come up with everybody's thoughts and opinions into a nice executive summary. Somehow we actually finally get there. Once it's gone through the internal reviews and everything's good, the last phase is the review by your regulatory authority, whether it be the FDA, Health Canada, PDMA, or PMDA, any of those. And then once it's submitted, you wait. And in many cases, you hope. So now we're going to walk through each of these 4 phases and look at exactly where AI can make a real impact today and in the very near future. We'll start with preparation. So this is what a lot of people, I mean, this is a workhorse. A lot of people find this very unglamorous, where the essential work of your regulatory intelligence comes in and your state of the art, which I will tell you, state of the art is one of my favorite things. So I'm one of those crazy ones. But think about how many times you spent Monday morning scrolling through the Federal Register, checking for new guidance documents, trying to figure out if anything changed over the weekend that may invalidate or contradict the strategy that you've been putting together over the last few weeks for your new product. I'm going to guess this has happened to pretty much all of us. And then you see a new guidance or a new regulation come out and you're like, ugh. But this is where AI is already delivering a lot of value. There are already platforms out there that can aggregate data from over 80 different global regulatory agencies, and they can do it into a single searchable intelligence layer. They're monitoring for guidance changes, enforcement actions, warning letters, new clearances in real time. So instead of checking 6 different websites every week or every morning, the AI can check 600 and tell you in the matter of minutes of any changes. You also use predicate device searches are another place where we're seeing a lot of big wins. You can find the right predicate for your FDA. In the past, it used to be kind of part art, part science. You know, you kind of had that hope in there where hope's not to be a strategy, but you hope you got the right one, especially for those new products that really didn't fit anywhere. This was really more of an art than anything else. Now you can use AI tools to scan the entire FDA database and other websites to try to find out what the appropriate predicate is and try to map your indications for use and even suggest what the strongest candidates are before you really get too far into a project. Literature reviews are much the same story. And clinical evaluations in the literature review part has been something that AI has been used for now for quite a while. So what used to take weeks can now be done, in a matter of hours. So there's been a paradigm shift in the regulatory world from being a little more reactive to much more proactive. We can no longer have to research things that have happened. We're able to catch them as they are happening, how they might happen, and get ahead of things. So now I want to move us on to what happens once we've gathered all of our intelligence. So this part's the part that is both very exciting and very terrifying, where you can use generative AI for your regulatory document drafting. And I think it's important for people to keep both the exciting aspect and the terrifying aspect in your mind at all times. Those people who get very excited about it and aren't scared at all at these tools, they're the ones that are going to get burnt because they rely usually much too heavily on them. And then you've got the people who are terrified of them and are refusing to use any AI tools. And that's going to be a problem too, because they're going to be completely left behind. Let's paint the picture. You need to write an executive summary. What has happened in the past is you'd sit down, pull up a previous submission, look at it, go, okay, I need to do this. Then you shared a blank document for a while. You procrastinate a little bit more by checking your email, getting a coffee, or in my case, a Diet Pepsi, and then you finally eventually start typing. But essentially, you're borrowing all the text that you've done in the past. Now, by the time you get this draft of the executive summary done, you've spent, probably a couple hours, unless you've really procrastinated. You might be into a couple of days, okay? But now we've got AI tools that can take all your documentation that you have throughout your system, all the R&D documentation. You can take your device description, your intended use, all of this, and in a matter of seconds, you can have your executive summary completely written, or a draft of it. I will put that, a draft. Now, the same is happening too with the clinical evaluation reports, risk analysis, any substantial equivalence arguments. It is the same thing. AI is helping to produce the first working draft. It's getting us from 0 to 60% complete almost instantaneously. But this is where we need to keep in mind, and this is very critical. Your 60% is not the 100%, okay? You cannot have it, write it, and send it off into Never Never Land. So there's some folklore out there. I don't know if this is true. If it is, I don't know the person, but somebody used AI to draft a predicate comparison table, and it was generated beautifully. The table was formatted, everything sounded great. The one problem was that the predicate wasn't real. It didn't exist. It was basically a hallucinated product. And again, whether or not this actually happened or not, who knows, but it does help you keep in mind. I mean, you don't want to have to write to the reviewer, well, please find my comparison of the device that exists only in the dreams of my AI tool. I mean, that's really not going to go well for you. But it's important to remember, as we begin using AI tools more and more in the world of regulatory, we're moving more from, the document creator and the author to the editor of the documents. So now we move to the creation of the documents to assembling the submission. And this here is quite a skill. I applaud people who are very good at assembling documents without losing their mind. You've got people who can actually pull together right now submissions from multiple sites. You've got 47 documents from 12 different authors, and you can pull that together, get things formatted, get it to look right, and get it to sound like it's a coherent, that you created a coherent story and that it was written by one person. However, this takes a lot of time, weeks, sometimes months, depending on what it is to get all this, together. Now we have AI that can transform this work. You can use AI to help with your automated formatting, make sure things are consistently formatted across the board. That's a tough thing. People get very particular about the way they format their documents, and they're not willing to change, even if that document needs to go into a bigger submission. Second, it can be used for cross-referencing. You've got a long document, you've got clinical summary, and on page 42 references test data on page 187, but you have another document that references the same data but slightly different. Well, that's a potential problem, and somebody may not actually be able to pick that up. AI will pick that up for you. And then the third way AI can be used is to help to assemble the actual submission and get things put together in a nice, neat package. So the result from all this is what used to take a couple of weeks to a couple of months with all hands on deck can now be compressed into hours or days so that your team can focus on the quality instead of the formatting. So if we move into the quality aspect of things, let's think about one of the major questions here. What's the difference between a submitted submission and a submission-ready submission? If you think about it, if you submitted something that wasn't submission-ready, you're going to spend a lot more time in the review process. And you're going to get refused to accept, or you're going to get requests for additional information, which is just going to extend your timeline. You're going to lose weeks, potentially months. And when things get stopped, the timeline, your clock starts all over sometimes. So this is where you can use some AI-powered gap analysis tools. And this is where they become really transformational. There's a lot of platforms that have started out there that can actually take your drafts of your documents and look for gaps and look for those inconsistencies. And it can check against your FDA guidance, your EU MDR requirements, ISO 13485, 14971, and more. And it can do it not sequentially, but rather simultaneously in the matter of minutes. Think about what this means. It means your senior regulatory specialist that's spending days manually walking through checklists and inevitably missing something because they're human and it's Thursday and they've been at the same thing since Monday. You get an AI platform that can scan this. It can identify, 12 potential gaps that point you to the direction to look, and you can go and the human can then review them, see how things are, see if it's a true gap, not a true gap, and how they want to address that. However, this is where people need to be careful. These tools don't replace our quality review. They just make the quality review much better by catching all of these mechanical gaps so that we can have people actually look at the more substantive gaps that we have, or the flows. You want to make sure that you're providing a story to the regulatory authorities, and a non-fictional story at that walks them through how your device is intended to be used and shows that it's safe and effective for those intended uses. So let's talk about what happens when we send the draft for further internal review. So we all have those colleagues. Hopefully you don't have too many in your organization, but every organization needs at least one who reads every single document with a magnifying glass. And they send back the comments like, on page 47, you say the device is intended for adult patients. But on page 121, it says intended for patients aged 18 and older. Are those the same? And you just want to scream, but you realize that you didn't keep your vocabulary right and you weren't consistent. Because if it's caught internally, it could also be caught by a reviewer, which then could generate a few more questions and additional requests, which will cost you more time. Now, congratulations, this annoying colleague is now a bot. And it's a bot that doesn't need coffee, it doesn't take vacations, and will definitely find the inconsistencies between these 2 pages and about 5 more pages while they're at it. And now you don't have to be mad at any of your human colleagues anymore for catching all these things that you secretly wish they didn't notice, because now you have to go back and fix them. So AI tools can now scan the entire submission package for consistency, making sure that the device description matches across all sections. Do risk controls in your risk management file, are they aligned with what you're saying actually with your clinical evidence? When you made a change to your intended use, did that get updated across all the sections? This is where a bot comes in. You're also going to be able to perform some contradiction detection. You can go through and check your biocompatibility section to make sure that it's not saying one thing, whereas your actual clinical section is saying that there's something completely different. And you're going to have somebody that's going to be able to do this all the time, whereas a person, your subject matter expert, at 4:47 on a Friday before the long Memorial weekend is not going to catch this. Another game changer in this is being able to automate your redlining and version controls. So instead of manually checking changes across 14 rounds of reviews, it can now be tracked with the appropriate tools. The result here is your review cycles can be significantly shortened from a couple of weeks down to usually a week. Now, the next part of the internal review where you can use AI, and this will really shift AI from being an efficiency tool to providing a real strategic advantage, is the fact that you can use AI to predict what the FDA may ask. So here's the general overall premise of this. The FDA has been sending requests for additional information, deficiency letters, refuse to accept decisions for decades. That's a lot of data out there about what the FDA has not liked about submissions. What if you could train the AI model on the data set and use it to predict what the FDA is likely to ask about your submission before you submit it? It's not really hypothetical. We're not far from there. Machine learning can do that. Machine learning now analyzes patterns, and it can analyze patterns in feedback from the FDA. What product codes generate more questions? What specific sections are frequently flagged as insufficient? Things like that will greatly reduce the overall review time and get your device to market much faster. So imagine running your draft of your 510K, or for that matter, a draft of your technical documentation through a predictive model and getting back a report that says, based on historical patterns for this product code, there's a 78% likelihood the reviewer will request additional biocompatibility data, and a 62% likelihood they'll ask for clarification of your predicate comparison methodology. You can then address those gaps before you actually submit. So now we're talking about preemptive defense here. And now you've got regulatory strategies that can be powered by data, not just the intuition that we've all been working off of. And keep in mind, the intuition that we've worked off of, especially those people who have worked at a company for 15 years and have done so many submissions, they have this predictive sense about, I think this is going to raise some additional questions. Well, AI is just doing it, predicting things on a larger scale than we're capable of as humans. Okay, so now we've gone through the internal review, we've made all of our corrections, and now we're going to cross over to the other side of the desk and look what the regulators themselves are doing. Because the regulators are using AI too. And understanding their AI strategy is critical to understanding how to prepare your submissions. Excuse me. Let's start with the FDA. The agency adopted an AI co-pilot they've named ELSA. ELSA helps the FDA reviewers with technical screening, documents, summarizing, and organizing large submission packages. Importantly, the FDA states that ELSA does not train on industry data or submissions. It's not an efficiency tool necessarily for the reviewers. It's an efficiency tool for the reviewers, not a decision-making tool. But think about the implications of this. If AI is summarizing your 500-page submission for a reviewer, the way you prepare your submission matters more now than ever. The clarity of your submission, the structure of your submission, the consistency of your writing is extraordinarily important. And globally, now we have the International Medical Device Regulators Forum finalizing, good machine learning practices and releasing new draft frameworks for AI life cycles. The EU has been navigating a lot of intersections between the medical device regulations and the AI Act, and publishing MDCG guidance documents on frameworks. It's one of these complex landscapes that are occurring, and it's moving fast. The bottom line is working for companies and being responsible for the regulatory strategies and putting submissions together. We need to understand how the reviewers and how the regulatory authorities are using AI now so that we can prepare accordingly. Okay, so now that we've talked about, a lot of things with how wonderful AI is, I want to bring up some things where it can really destroy our submission, our credibilities, and possibly our careers if we're not careful. So let's talk about hallucinations. In the AI world, a hallucination is when the model generates information that is factually wrong, but sounds completely confident and plausible. Large language models don't know things. They predict. Everything they do is a prediction. They predict the most likely next word based on patterns. Sometimes those predictions are brilliant. Sometimes they're fabrications that are dressed basically in a very convincing suit. And sometimes for regulatory strategies, putting lipstick on a pig is really not a good strategy. I mentioned the fabricated predicate device earlier. That's not necessarily an isolated incident, even if it didn't actually truly happen. But there are instances with legal professionals that have already been sanctioned for submitting AI-generated briefs that cited non-existent case laws. So imagine the regulatory equivalent, a clinical evaluation report that cites a study that was never published, or a risk analysis that referenced an ISO standard clause that doesn't exist. And I do want to I'll bring up a personal story that happened here this week without giving too many details, but this exact thing happened with an IEC standard here. Somebody used AI to make an argument that we were not following the IEC standard, referenced an annex. Well, that annex is actually in the standard, but not what it was called, and it was not the same content. But the whole argument they had coming out of AI was beautiful. Completely fabricated, completely wrong, but beautiful. So the consequences that we have are actually kind of severe. So you have a fabricated reference in your submission that goes to the FDA or a notified body because it didn't get flagged. It could raise questions, and it will raise questions about the integrity of your entire submission and back to your entire quality management system if you're not careful. If you can't trust references, people are going to start to wonder what else they can't trust. This will end up being a very systemic credibility problem for our company. The other thing that you have to be careful of, it's not just a few hallucinations, but something very similar. It's plausible nonsense. Again, you get text that is grammatically perfect. Everything is great. However, it really scientifically is not correct. Or it'll misapply. I mean, if AI can write a biocompatibility rationale that reads beautifully, but fundamentally misapplies the ISO 10993 series. You also have to be careful because it can generate a clinical evaluation summary that sounds very authoritative, but cherry-pick data in a way that competent reviewer would never have accepted. So the bar for accuracy in regulatory work is not, we can't have the bar set at good enough. It's got to be defensible under an audit. And AI tools don't don't really understand that. They don't understand that there's a bar. So us humans understand that there's a bar. So with everything we use AI for, we need to keep the human constantly in the loop. They're still essential in all of that. And we'll get to that in a little bit. But I want to touch a little bit on the ethical landscape, and then we'll talk about why humans, what our job function is going forward. So here's a question that I've heard asked several times. Should you tell the FDA or any regulatory authority that you used AI to help prepare your submission? Well, the FDA doesn't currently have any explicit requirements to disclose the use of AI in submission preparations, and most regulatory authorities right now do not. They care about the accuracy, the completeness, and the truthfulness of what you submit, not the tools that you use to create it. The sponsor or submitter is who's 100% accountable for the content, whether a human did it, an AI did it, or a team of trained monkeys produced the first draft. Nobody cares as long as everything is accurate. But again, it comes back to, okay, they may not require it, but is it a good idea? And those are two different things. I tend to have, basically my view is if decisions were made off of AI and it had thorough reviews, I don't necessarily think it necessarily needs to be disclosed. You don't actually disclose which person did the first draft of a document anyways. So, but there are also some harder ethical questions. If you use AI drafts to draft your clinical evaluation report, and the AI was trained on a data set that underrepresents certain patient populations, is there an embedded bias in your clinical argument that you're even aware of? And then who's accountable when AI introduces a subtle error that a human reviewer doesn't catch? The AI vendor, the user, the company? What about intellectual property? What are the implications if the AI tool was trained on competitors' published submissions? Again, my recommendation, and this is a fully personal one, not legal one, you want to build some type of transparency into your process now, document where you're using it, but I don't necessarily think it always needs to be disclosed. Okay, so now you hopefully are convinced that AI can really help your job out as a regulatory affairs specialist, and you're aware of some of the risks. So now what? How do you actually deploy AI tools in a regulated environment without giving your quality team that collective panic attack with them feeling like they're losing control? So I would say the answer is the same as we do for any new tool, process, or technology that you would bring into the industry. You want to put some governance around it, some structure, some documentation, all that boring stuff that keeps our quality assurance people employed. Step one, SOPs for AI-assisted documentation. I would set a procedure or start with getting a procedure that defines which AI tools are approved for use, what tasks they can be used for, and critically, when verification requirements for the AI-generated output is needed. If the auditor asks how a document was created and your answer is someone used ChatGPT, that's probably not necessarily going to end well for you. Step two is to consider validations. Now, I wouldn't necessarily validate a general purpose AI tool for the same way you validate a QMS software system, but you need to establish some type of fitness for this purpose. Can the tool reliably produce output that meets your quality standards? How do you know that? What evidence do you have? Think of it as a risk-based approach to AI tool qualification. And step three, training. People need to know how to use AI tools effectively and responsibly. This is going to mean prompt engineering basics, output verification techniques, and perhaps most importantly, understanding the limitations. Training should cover what AI is good at, what it's terrible at, and where the human checkpoints is non-negotiable. Last thing to consider when building AI into your QMS is audit trails. Maintain records of AI prompts, that are good, outputs, and human modifications. Some organizations are implementing drafting histories, which features a time span for every AI suggestion. The good news in all this is you're not really building a new quality management system. You're just extending what you already have. The AI tools we're talking about fit into all of your frameworks, whether it's a CAPA framework, the document control system, or your training program. You just need to learn to incorporate it in there. Remember, start small, and then you can scale safely as you begin to learn how to use the systems. I also want to address what the elephant in the room is, and maybe it's not the elephant in the room of everybody sitting here, but it is an elephant in the room that we have at a lot of our sites here. This is all great and good, but is AI going to take my job? And the answer to that is no. It's absolutely, empathetically not going to take your job. So AI can do a lot of drafting, but it can't make decisions. It can propose alternate pathways and suggest what the risks may be and what you need to consider, but it is not making the decision for you. Anything that's a judgment call, that's up to the human. That's up to you. That's up to me. You know, AI may be able to scan FDA databases, may be able to suggest predicate devices, but it's not going to be sitting across from a reviewer in a pre-submission meeting trying to present something, then reading the room and adjusting the argument in real time to try to get what you need. Okay, so that interpersonal intelligence, AI is not there. That's us. That's you, that's me, that's all of us. So AI can provide suggestions, but it should not be used as a decision making. And here's what I think is actually going to happen. AI is not going to eliminate the regulatory jobs. It's going to elevate them. It's going to remove the drudgery, the formatting, the cross-referencing, the initial first drafts, all of this, the copying and pasting for, being able to get your submissions out into, 12 different countries. It's going to get rid of all of that and free us up to do the more important work, the work that uses our brain, the strategy, the judgments, the persuasion, the innovation that comes along with it. So I do think that the regulatory professional of 2028 will be somebody who knows how to wield AI as a force multiplier while applying the irreplaceable experience that AI cannot replicate. The skill set's evolving, but it's evolving upward. We're not evolving outward. We're not being replaced, and we're just being upgraded. And with that, I'd like to shift us to the practical. What can we actually do in the next week, get us started using AI for those companies that are not using it? So I'm going to provide you with 5 things you can literally do Monday morning with no budget, no approval required, no IT ticket. You just start and start implementing. So the first thing is audit your current workflows for AI-type opportunities. Walk through your last submission chronologically. Where did your team spend the most time on repetitive, low-judgment tasks? Literature searches, formatting, cross-referencing, copying and pasting already existing information. Those are all AI candidates. Write them down. Be specific, like formatting of this submission, this section of this submission, not just things like document preparation. The next thing, pilot one AI tool in a low-risk context or low-risk environment. Pick a task that is not critical on either a live submission or a MPD project. You don't want to hold anything up as you learn. Maybe you can use a generative AI tool to draft an internal SOP or run an AI literature search alongside your manual one and compare what the results are. The goal isn't to use something in production here. The goal is to learn. So you want to build your intuition for what AI does well and where it falls short, including how you need to detail your expectations to the AI tool. Remember, the AI tool is responding to your commands. You give ambiguous commands, you're going to get ambiguous results. Step 3, draft an AI use SOP. Even a one-page document that says, here's how we use AI. Here's what requires human verification. Here's how we document it. You'll refine it over time, but having something written down moves you from kind of an ad hoc experimentation to more of a governed process. And guess what? Quality will be happy with you. Number 4, start a regulatory AI reading list. Subscribe to the FDA's digital health newsletter. Follow the International Medical Device Regulators Forum, their working group information. Go through this, set Google alerts for AI regulatory submissions. You want to stay informed. The landscape is moving fast, not only on manufacturer side who need to prepare submissions, but also on the regulator side and how they're using AI. And number 5, talk to your QA team about governance. Don't wait for them to come over, walk over, send them a Teams message, however you communicate, and say, hey, I want to start using AI tools in our regulatory workflow. Here's how we can figure out the governance together. You want to pull your quality partners in, or anybody else who may act as a gatekeeper. I'll say gatekeeper, not roadblock. And that's going to be the fastest way to get people pulled in. So here you have 5 steps that are all achievable, and better yet, all free, and maybe even better than free. You don't have to involve your IT department.